So I grew up in a town called Rumson, New Jersey. It was on the Jersey Shore, about an hour outside of New York City. Most of the folks that lived in Rumson would commute to the city. And my parents had a pharmacy, a small pharmacy in the town of Rumson. And so we grew up working in the pharmacy, my brother and I. And when we were kids, we were fortunate enough to go to summer camp in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And that had a big impact on us. New Jersey, obviously, a really dense place. A lot of people, not a lot of obvious environmental, recreational things that were there. You had the ocean, but I was really drawn to the mountains, and was able to come out to Jackson Hole for summers as a kid, and get to experience what it was like to live in the mountains. And that had a big impact on the trajectory of my career. And really how I got to, initially applied ecology and landscape ecology, and eventually to, the frontline technology.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine where you grew up in New Jersey is not like Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I feel like they would be complete opposites.
There's a lot more people in my hometown in New Jersey than there are in Jackson. It was very much the opposite side of the coin. New Jersey, highest density state in the country. Jackson Hole has, maybe 13 or 14,000 people that live here.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know it was that small.
There's very few people. We have a lot of tourists. We have a lot of people that come through here that visit the national parks, whether it be Yellowstone or Grand Teton. A lot of people that come down to the town square. But as far as like actual residents that live in the valley, there's very few, I happen to be one of the fortunate ones. My wife, her family grew up here. She grew up here. Her family is fifth generation Jackson. So it was really a marriage of of someone who grew up in New Jersey with a person that grew up in Jackson Hole, and not just in Jackson Hole, but a very remote area of Jackson as well. So look, I love it. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. And it's a really great place to, spend time outdoors. And, spending the time outdoors, being able to ski, fish, hike in the forest, you get to observe really all seasons of nature here. They're very tangible. You can see the life cycle of the plant communities. You take the same walk and see how, the different plant communities that you travel through on that hike change over the course of the year. So that's really one of the nice, beautiful aspects of living in Jackson.
I love that description. And so as you mentioned, you studied landscape ecology at the University of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. And just kind of out of curiosity, what was that study like? I don't know much about that space. I mean...
Yeah, so landscape ecology is a study of how the built environment interfaces with natural process. Oh. And the University of Michigan has its landscape ecology, landscape architecture program housed in the School of Natural Resources. So, the benefit of that approach is you are studying the functionality of ecosystems. And then you're learning how to design elements of, living, essentially, homes, landscapes, into the functionality of these ecosystems. So it's very much blending form and function. It was really within that context that, it became a launching pad for wildfire. As you can appreciate, wildfire is, sort of the interface of where, homes, businesses, communities, they are all subjected to wildfire, and understanding, the ways in which we could safely live with fire as a natural process. It was really the target. Originally coming out of Ann Arbor, the target was to manage forests. So I left Ann Arbor and moved out to Jackson Hole. It was that impressionable as a kid when I went to camp out here that it was a place I wanted to get back to. And so after graduating from University of Michigan, I moved out to Jackson, and I started up a company that was a forestry and applied ecology company. And what we were doing was managing plant fuels. So we were doing...
Did you say plant fuels?
Plant fuels, yeah. Basically, we were doing forestry work. Okay. And we were managing forests for density, structure, age, type. We were doing so in areas where there was a reluctance to have fire, maintain its the natural fire regime. There was a reluctance to put fire on the landscape, let it burn naturally. And so we were trying to mimic the processes of fire, but do so mechanically. Essentially, reduce density through logging. We did a lot of logging work. I had log trucks, I had skidders, I had saw crews. We ran about 100 people in that company, and we grew it to manage land from Wyoming up to Montana down to New Mexico. And we were doing a lot of restoration type ecology. So doing aspen regeneration. We were doing a lot of work where we were, if you're familiar with pine beetle, at the time, pine beetle was at epidemic levels, epidemic stages, and highly prevalent in the forests. Pine beetle is taking down a lot of trees, causing mortality throughout large swaths of forest. And if you think about sort of the habitat that pine beetle occupies, it's the same exact habitat that fire occupies. You got high density, highly stocked forest. There's a lot of competition amongst the plants, the trees in that forest. They're competing for the same sunlight. They're competing for the same water or nutrient. They get stressed out in that competition. You layer on drought, and it creates really the ideal habitat for there to be, sort of large swaths of forest mortality that was at the hand of it's called Dendroctonus, right, as the genus. And there's different species based on the type of tree that Dendroctonus inhabits. You've got pine beetle, which is Dendroctonus ponderosa. You've got Doug fir beetle, which is Dendroctonus menziesii. You've got spruce beetle, which is Dendroctonus rufipennus. And, it was an opportunity to really study how other disturbance in nature that were not just fire, but rather, insect related, that have co-evolved with our forests for, eons. How they interact, amongst the forest, amongst one another. And you've got a true appreciation for the interdependency of flora and fauna in these plant communities across space and across time. So, when you looked at it at a high level, the concept was to, manage these forests and play the role of fire, doing so mechanically with traditional sort of forestry means, but applying a better prescription. So opening up the forest, reducing that competition, bringing more sunlight, bringing in more heat to the forest floor, regenerating the forest, and essentially creating the disturbance that fire might otherwise create, but doing so without the impact that fire has. So fast forward, I started to, we started to manage a lot of land, a lot of forests throughout the Rockies. And, we were seeing where you would reduce the density and you'd restore the forests in areas that received management. But in areas that didn't receive management, I mean, you could have hundreds of thousands of acres that were adjacent to the area that you managed that, were under the same condition prior to management. Mm-hmm. And so the species that were present in those adjacent forest lands simply came on to the land that we had just managed. And, it was a setback from the management perspective in so much as, you didn't really, you didn't alter the timeline, right? You didn't alter the successional stage of that plant community from a biotic perspective, because everything else just came onto it from the adjacent lands. Uh-huh. So ultimately, it became very clear that, managing this through human involvement, through human means, was limited in capacity. We couldn't go out and manage all the communities that didn't receive management. You have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres, millions of acres, and even though we were as sensitive as we possibly could be by going out there and doing forestry work, it ultimately had a different impact than the natural process of fire, and B, most importantly, was not as efficient as the process of fire. So, all plant communities across the U.S. have a natural fire regime. All plant communities. Doesn't matter if it's a forest or a grassland or a shrubland. If you're on the eastern seaboard of Atlantic City, you had fire impact Atlantic City at the turn of the last century. And you have the Pine Barrens, of New Jersey, and you've got many pine communities along the eastern seaboard, and that extends across the country. About 80% of the fires that you see burning in the U.S. Are in grasslands and shrublands. You see about 20% that of the fires burning in forest lands, and so all these plant communities depended on the natural process of fire. And to preach the concept of restoring natural fire regimes, when you have 20,000 to 30,000 homes and businesses burning each year, you're going to be on the bleeding edge until you found a way to protect homes, businesses, and communities from burning. And so, really, we backed into Frontline based on the need to, have a sound ecological discussion around natural fire regimes. And we knew we couldn't have that discussion until we figured out a way to protect homes and businesses and communities from burning.
Interesting. So just to be extra clear, for anyone listening who doesn't have a background in this subject, as myself, for the most part, the natural fire regime you're describing basically means that in nature, naturally, there would be a fire of sorts that would do the work that you were trying to replicate. But I guess when you bring that subject up, is it a public perception thing at that time that the idea that you would, I don't know if you're talking about creating controlled fires or something else, but that would be seen as a high, very dangerous thing and not necessary. So let's not do that. Let's not talk about it. Like, why was it that protecting homes and structures needed to be folded into the conversation in order for people to listen, if that's the point you were making? Yeah,
no, it's a great question. I mean, historically, we think that, we can control nature.
Yeah.
And, the idea of controlling any aspect of nature is, it doesn't make sense. I don't think that you could point to any natural process that has ever been controlled by human beings. And more importantly, you can't point to any natural process that has been assisted by, human management. But nonetheless, since the turn of the century, last century, as a public policy, we've taken this approach of snuffing out fires. And, the Forest Service as a good example of putting out all fires that crop up and doing so as quickly as possible. We've developed massive firefighting resources and capabilities to identify a fire that happens anywhere in a grassland or a shrubland or in a forest and go as quickly as possible and try to put that out. And what it's done is it has interrupted the process of nature. So it has delayed natural processes that have relied on those fires to burn. And, you know, to be clear, we don't have a great feedback loop of how damaging our policy for the last 100 years has been. It's just simply because we don't surface that as a dashboard sort of KPI that we use to say, hey, here's the functionality of a plant community, and here's the value of that plant community if uninterrupted. But it's rather the opposite. We say, okay, you know, for the last 100 years, it's been, look, we've put out this number of fires, and, you know, in doing so, we've protected, you know, this number of you know, acres, right?
Right.
And that concept of protecting acres, you know, in and of itself is, you know, kind of delusional, in so much as those acres have depended on that fire to burn in the first place. But we're using that acreage unit of measurement to, you know, say, look, if you've got less acres burned, that's a good thing. If you got more acres burned, it's a bad thing. The natural perspective is the opposite. You know, the more acres burned, the better. The less acres burned, look, you know, you've got a fire deficit, right? And really, from a human perspective, from a colonization perspective, from a, you know, a homeowner, a business owner, a community perspective, it's sort of irrelevant as long as the homeowner, the business owner, the community can safely live with the natural process of fire. They're good. That's the dashboard metric. That's the KPI, right? Huh. And so it's more like, you know, the higher number of the acres burned, the lower the number of structures burned. That's really what we need to be targeting. And it's like any natural peril. You know, like you can't control the wind, you can't control snow, you can't control rain. You build your communities to live with these other natural perils, and it's very much the same thing with wildfire.
That's very
fascinating. Yeah, super fascinating. Do you think? And so, what are the problems caused when we intentionally stave off fires and delay them or put them out too quickly? Is it that we're building up? Is it that we're allowing the development for a super fire to occur later on? Or is it that the species become overpopulated over each other? Like, what are the problems with doing that? There's probably a bunch.
Yeah, there's a lot, you know, and yeah, there's definitely a lot, and there's some that we understand, and there's a lot that we don't understand, and I think there's a limited acknowledgement of saying that, you know, we don't know what we don't know, right? Because there's a lot that we don't know. And there's a lot that we don't know that we don't know. And so, you know, in the context of the obvious, you know, which is like increased fuels, right? If you have fires that are occurring, you know, under their natural fire regimes, you know, you take grasslands as an example. You know, grasslands, you know, the fire return interval could be 12 months, it could be 36 months. But, you know, you could think about it, you know, you've grasses that, you know, during the spring and the summer months, they're green, they receive, you know, rain, they stay green. As things dry out, they get brown, and, you know, they're ready to burn. With, you know, shrubs, it's similar, but you know, you've got a longer fire return interval. With forest lands, you take the forest lands, like the mixed conifer forests in Jackson Hole, you know, the fire return interval for, you know, these mixed con forests in Jackson Hole could be 80 to 120 years. And it's similar to that of, like, you know, Tahoe as an example. Mixed conifer forest, you know, in the Nevadas, you know, are you know, similar, 80 to 120 years. So by interrupting these natural processes, you know, it contributes to overstocking, right? So you've got greater density. You didn't have that disturbance, which is a very natural disturbance, go through to, you know, open up the canopy, bring in more sunlight, bring in more heat to the forest floor, regenerate the system. So, you know, you have an increase in fuels. You know, those fuels will persist longer for the forests, using forests as an example, that have dendroctonus, that have pine beetle, you know, occupy that forest and cause mortality in that forest. Eventually, those trees fall down, and you get you get jackstraw where, it's really difficult to move through the forest. You got a bunch of material that's on the forest floor. You got a bunch of material that, is still standing. And then because, the trees fell over in the forest floor, you have more sunlight. So you have that sapling class, that younger, immature class of forest start growing up. And so you've got this bed of fuel, both horizontal and vertical, and it contributes to really big burns.
Do you think, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but do you think that what you're describing was also what caused the LA fires to be so severe this time? Because we were over controlling the fires previously?
I think with the LA fires, if you look at the last 3 or 4 really big fires, you have LA, you have the Marshall Fire in Boulder, you have the Lahaina Fire in Hawaii, Santa Rosa, the Coffee Park, the Tubbs Fire in Santa Rosa. And those are just the ones in the U.S. You've got equivalent ones that are burning, elsewhere in the world. Those were all grassland fires that I just mentioned, right? Grass and shrub fires. You didn't see any forest in LA. You didn't see any forest in Boulder. You didn't see any forest in Lahaina. So no, I mean, I think in much of our policy, from a forestry perspective is, go jump out a plane or, go put a bunch of chemical on a forest and prevent it from burning. I think in grasslands, independent of what you do from a plant management perspective, like when the wind's blowing and you have a fire, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's say that it was forest in LA, just for example, right? Let's say it was forest. Like if you had gone and done forest management in whatever the forest might look like in LA,
yeah.
then like you would have opened up the canopy, brought in more sunlight to the floor, less competition. You would have grown more grass, right? And all that grass is carrying the fire. So like, even if we were to cut down every single tree in the world, it really, what that's going to contribute to is more grassland and probably more fire because you got a quicker fire return interval associated with it. And again, once the wind's blowing, there's nothing that we can do, under these traditional firefighting means that are going to be at all impactful. So yeah, no, I don't necessarily think that any management of plant communities is going to have a significant contribution to protecting our built communities. And I mean, that was really the reason that I got off of plant fuels management, is because at the end of the day, it's going to have a minimal impact. I mean, the reality is we need to assemble our homes, our buildings, our communities in a manner that safely lives with fire. And, that's why I dug into Frontline and really started to, develop the platform.
You just answered the next question, which I was going to ask, which is like, so we've been talking about, fires and their important role in the natural space. Of course, what you guys do as Frontline is to defend people and structures from fires, which in some ways seems to be on the other side of the conversation. So maybe elaborate and talk us through how Frontline first started, when did it start, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it first started when, I was walking through a forest that we had just managed in Jackson Hole. And we were textbook in reducing the density of that forest. And there's a unit of measurement that's called basal area, which is a square foot measurement of the trunks of trees across an acre of forest. And, at the time, the concept was, look, if you reduce your basal area to a certain number, that got to a lower stocking density, then that would have a beneficial impact on reducing pine beetle from impacting that forest. And on that same forest, we were doing a lot of aspen management as well. And aspen are a pioneer species, right? Meaning that they're the first species in. If you have a blank canvas, in Jackson Hole, there's two types of species that come in first, right? Generally speaking, you've got aspen and you've got lodgepole pine. And, as those plant communities grow, they're high stocking, high density, they create shade for other species that are shade friendly to grow up underneath them. And, if you take aspen as an example, if you have natural occurring fire regimes, then, eventually fire goes through that aspen stand, eliminates the competition that's shade friendly that's growing underneath the aspen, and regenerates the aspen stand. It actually heats up the roots of the aspen, and it stimulates, it takes out the tops, the above ground trees, and it stimulates the roots to kick off new aspen stands. And so I was looking around, and we're managing this forest, and I was like, this isn't the right approach. And and I was like, okay, we need to let fire do its own thing. And but you're gonna be laughed out of the room, right? Mm-hmm. Because the historical management is like, just cut everything, put out the fire, right? Right. Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, right? And so you're fighting an uphill battle. So, okay, we said, look, to understand how to have this sound ecological discussion, I need to figure out how to protect homes and communities from burning during a fire. So I dug in to better understand what the cause of structure ignition is during a wildfire. We started to study fires throughout the U.S. I started to study fires through Canada. I started to study fires in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece. I started to look at fire behavior in the Southern Hemisphere as well, in South Africa and Chile and Argentina and New Zealand and Australia. And I also started to see supermarkets that were burning down, right? And other commercial structures that were surrounded by parking lot. And these were, there were no trees nearby. There were acres and acres of parking spaces. So, I dug in to better understand what the cause of structure ignition is during these fires, and realized, there was an early, it was early in the study of embers, but embers cause 90% of structure ignitions during a fire. Yeah. So, and these embers are essentially lofted into the wind. Mm-hmm. And it's really how hard the wind's blowing that is what happens next. So if the wind's blowing like hurricane force winds, like we saw in LA, like we saw in Boulder, like we saw in Lahaina, like we saw in Tubbs. I mean, these are wind-driven ember storms, right? These embers can get lofted 24 miles outside of a wildfire perimeter. Yeah. So they land on the combustible surfaces of the structure, right? Or they land on adjacent fuels like patio furniture, front door mats. They land in the gutters, they catch the leaves, the pine needles on fire. They land on your kids' toys that are just outside in the patio, and they cause a small fire. Mm-hmm. And, when you draw a 24-mile radius outside of a wildfire, depending on the location of the fire, you can encompass 500,000 to 1 million homes and businesses like simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So, there's way too many structures to protect than there are available boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. So essentially we said, okay, like we had to come up with a way to detect and track fire, and then use that information to activate a form of self-defense at your home. And, that's essentially, what we did is We built a geospatial software platform that's agnostic in the data sources that we ingest. So we ingest all data sources: satellite data, camera data, sensor data, weather data, fuels data, dryness of fuels, firefighter data, any and all data that contributes to firefighters in the fire service, we're able to ingest onto our platform. And then we use that data to inform a sprinkler system to activate and provide firefighter level protection without the need for firefighters to be present.
That is such a fascinating. We might have to have you on again just to talk about the evolution of your businesses, because the idea that you would study landscape ecology and all the background you just said, and then decide that you're going to deep dive into researching how wildfires or fires move, and then to create a software application, or however you describe it, is like a pretty. It's not a pivot, but it's a right turn, I feel, into a different space of now you're sensibly kind of a tech company, I guess, to a degree. Like that's not exactly the normal next step in the narrative that people would have maybe imagined, right? Like
Probably not. I don't know of any, it's not your typical sort of landscape architectural, next step, or landscape ecology next step. But like, to be impactful at scale, like, and to say on a unit to unit, like a point to point, point to set to point type basis of how we sort of colonize these areas, like dwell and balance, our the homes that we build, in areas that are, wildfire dependent areas. It was a necessity, right? So yeah, I mean, your traditional path isn't this, but like, as far as like your motivation for getting into the space in the first place, and sort of harmoniously blending, your home with, the natural environment that surrounds your home, it was very much a similar concept. And it's really that genius of place that, it draws people to live in their sort of home territories, right? My home territory, was once New Jersey, now it's Jackson Hole. But like, I live here, because I love living here. And what comes with living in Jackson Hole is you build a roof that could support a lot of snow. And you assemble other components of your home, your architecture of your home, so that it withstands heavy wind loads. It withstands the snow load. There's some seismic, but there's also, there's wildfire, right? And it's very similar to California as well. Like anything in LA, anything around, really the Western U.S. and the whole U.S. Like, it's not if you're going to face fire, it's when. It's when your home's going to face fire. And so, but understanding the natural fire regimes that are associated with those individual places, those genius of those places, and your, desire to live, in those places that you love. I mean, it's a responsibility to live lightly. And so, the target was to blend, form with function. And, in assembling Frontline, we had the functionality. Okay, so we've got a geospatial software platform. It detects, it tracks fire. Like, it's very similar to what was already being used for wildland firefighting needs. But then we just kind of we pivoted it to apply to structure protection, a self-defense mechanism for your home. But it wasn't just the functionality, right? You had the hardware component, right, and you had the software component. So you were managing your hardware and software, and the hardware component, it had to provide the functionality, but it also has to provide the form, right? No one wants to make a trade-off on aesthetic,
right,
for functionality, and there isn't a need to make a trade-off around aesthetic for functionality. And so we really focused from a core hardware perspective in achieving that, not having that trade-off. And at this point now, we've installed Frontline across so many different types of architectures, and it blends in really clean. Like it's just right. It's elegant, right, with the structure. We also wanted to do the same from a software interface. Your UI, your UX is such that like you go onto your app, your Frontline app, and it's equally elegant. It's attractive. The user interface is clean. The user experience is comfortable. And so, we very much looked at this, form and function target at a platform level.
Interesting. So, Frontline, it sounds like maybe you can give us a quick overview of the services and products, but it sounds like there's for sure active fire defense sprinkler systems, and there's an app. Are there other things that you guys provide? And part of that question too, I was just thinking, do folks also use you guys as a resource for general fire defense planning design strategies?
Architects do.
I was just going to say, I bet they do.
Yeah. So about a third of our projects are new construction. And we work with architects, and that's a lot of fun because you get to work with some great architects that, they're seeking the same goals that we are. They want to build a beautiful home, and they want that home to be functional, or business for that matter. And so, we interface with architects, we interface with forward-thinking general contractors, we interface with insurance companies. We interface with the homeowners too. So,
gotcha. And this is a specific question, but for the sprinkler systems themselves, are you guys the ones to do the install of them, or how does that work in relation to the rest of the construction process on the contractor?
So let's take new construction as an example. You were working with an architect. We will engage with the architectural team. We'll take the drawings, and then we'll provide a set of hydraulic plans for where pipe runs go. First, we start with where the coverage goes, right? So we've created a hydration prescription that answers really three questions, right? Mechanically answers where coverage is needed, and primarily where coverage is needed to provide coverage during wind-driven ember storms, so hurricane force winds. So we will provide a plan set that identifies where coverage goes on and around the structure, and then in software we're able to answer the other two questions, which is how much water and how often, right? But from a mechanical perspective, when you're building your home, you're going to take that coverage plan set, and then we'll provide a hydraulic drawing, identifies pipe runs that go throughout the structure, identifies the location of sprinkler fixtures so that you're achieving the coverage, identifies where those pipe runs get home run back into the mechanical rooms, or the area of the utilities that are going to be located in that home, and then our project management team will interface with the general contractor, and we typically use so it's Frontline that does the contract work, and then we've got a subcontract platform. So we typically use like the interior fire sprinkler contractor that is doing the work for the interior fire sprinkler system that goes into the home. When the walls are open, we will run the piping for the Frontline system fully separate and apart from the NFPA 13D application of the interior fire sprinkler system. And we poke out in the roof under the eaves, mount the equipment in the mechanical room. We onboard the controller, and the controller connects to our software platform every 60 seconds in the cloud. And
sorry, what is the controller?
The controller is our sort of our connective tissue between hardware and software. So our software platform's detecting and tracking all fire and fire-related variables like weather, in our software platform. It communicates with our controller in a bi-directional flow of data every 60 seconds. And so we're sending information that is, wildfire hazards, that are many miles outside your property, but have the potential to cast embers into your property. We, communicate that to the controller, and then from the controller level, we're getting telemetry from the property. So temperature, weather, or temperature, battery, water-related information, what communication peripheral it's operating on. That's how we're set up, and we're redundant in the communication stack there. We operate on Wi-Fi, cellular, and satellite connectivity, and it's automated. So, typically during a fire, the power shut down to the property. You'll typically lose Wi-Fi or Ethernet. We automatically roll over to cellular connectivity. If the cell towers burn down, like we saw in many fires, or PG&E or Edison, shut down the grid, and the cell tower backup battery is exhausted, you lose cell reception. We automatically roll over to satellite connectivity. So we want to maintain that persistent communication with the controller.
That's so interesting. Does the information the controller is collecting locally, does that get sent back to the software and become another point of information for other houses nearby? Like
exactly.
What do they call it? What's the phrase?
Network
like a shared
effect?
Network.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, Dave. We have network impacts and network effects in that context, right? So, we're able to surface this all, on our back end where we see the entire fleet, it's very much a digital fire department that we have built.
So, do you have different levels of output of water from this sprinkler system? Let's say like just a mist, or like a big shower hosing of the perimeter around the house.
And also, what do they plug into? They plug into the water mains.
Okay, so we've got.
Sorry, I just stacked on another question. I apologize.
No, they're both relevant. They're both relevant questions. So there's two types of water sources that we'll utilize. We've got closed loop, where someone gets their water from a well. You've got open loop, where a person gets their water from a municipal system. We have very much focused on creating a water smart device at both the structure level and the community level. So we optimize the amount of water that is needed to protect the home. You need very, very little water to avoid a fire. You need a lot of water to put a fire out. And so, essentially we assembled a fuel model on and around the structure of like the types of materials you're going to find, on your home extending to 30 feet off the walls of your home. And, it's patio furniture, it's patio tables, it's front door mats, it's adjacent plant fuels, it's kids' toys. Yeah. And we said, okay, to wet those materials down to the extent that when embers land on those materials, they're in a state that doesn't combust, right? We had to essentially calculate the amount of energy that's being applied from ember cast onto those recipient fuels, and then dispel that energy with water that's applied and sort of hydrating those materials so that when the embers landed on them, they're in a state that didn't combust. They're too wet to burn, right? So we very much focused it on just the right amount of water to go do that. And the reason being is water it's already valuable. It's going to become increasingly valuable, as climate continues to get warmer. And we need to minimize the amount of water that's being used to protect. And it's not just protecting one home. We're talking about protecting entire communities now, right?
Yeah.
So you're thinking about not just this one unit, but like every single home in that community. And we also wanted to be interoperable with firefighters, right? We want to be a companion tool that firefighters can use. Now, firefighters are focused on life safety. They are there to get you out of harm's way. And in LA, that was an incredible example of firefighters saving a lot of lives. A lot of lives. But we all you saw entire neighborhoods in LA burning down.
Yeah.
And so we're very sensitive to being collaborative with the fire service, being like highly optimized in water efficiency, so that we could be used as a tool. That is that's most prevalent in these open loop systems where you've got homes that are connected to municipal systems. Mm-hmm. In a closed loop system, that's really your, that's your well. That's really what you're focused on there.
Is there any chance of being able to use like pool water? Because a lot of homes, let's say in LA and those regions, have pools, which are huge buckets of water. Is it possible to use that water to prevent a fire, or is it actually worse to use that water?
No, that's a great question. We have a pool kit. It's an automatic pool kit that, if our system senses a drop in municipal water pressure, it'll automatically kick on a pool pump, and it'll draft water out of your pool, or you could set up tanks, or some customers actually draw off lakes or ponds. Wow. So it's very much a thing, and we've got a lot of customers that do that.
That's pretty cool.
You were talking a moment ago about not just saving one house, but thinking community-wide. Has there been any discussions between cities and your company about implementing some of this technology in the more public areas? I mean, the thing that just came to mind very randomly was, can we have a sprinkler system attached to each, light post on a street or something? So we are dousing streets and the trash cans and all that stuff, and not just what's in a private property.
We've had those discussions. We're early in a lot of those discussions, but we've done community level protection. So we've done community level networks of frontline systems that will provide community level protection. We need to get realistic about our abilities to defend against ember storms. The LAFD is the largest fire department in the world, and with you saw what happened in January. There is no fire department on earth can defend against an ember storm where you literally have trillions and trillions of embers that are floating through the air, and in hurricane force winds and just lighting things up. So being realistic that this is the primary cause of structure ignition, right? Like, it's been calculated that 90% of structures ignite from embers. And when you look at the way in which communities prepare themselves for wildfire, they do so through a tool that's called a Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The acronym is a CWPP. And in the CWPP, you identify where the exposure is to that community. You will, based on that exposure, draw your wildland urban interface layer. And then based on that wildland urban interface layer, you apply code, right? Where home hardening is needed, your density of firefighting resources. You're also going to set up your evacuation routes. You're going to prepare your community based on that CWPP, right? That's sort of that guiding document. Now, even though 90% of structures ignite from embers, you have less than 1% of CWPPs that have an ember model analysis that's incorporated into them. Wow. So we've set up this sort of a systemic issue where if we don't identify the problem statement correctly up front in the guiding document for preparing communities to defend themselves from wildfire, then everything downstream of that is destined to fail. Now, in Jackson Hole, I've been a member of a committee that's called the Teton Area Wildfire Protection Coalition. And it's called TAWPAC. It's a tough acronym, but like.
So I was just thinking what the acronym was.
Yeah, it was not a very well thought out acronym. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's included, it's kind of a model for like, all the stakeholders to plan. It includes the Forest Service, the Park Service, local fire department, state forestry, land trust, the Nature Conservancy. You've got a lot of neighborhood groups as well that are a part of it. And TAWPAC has overseen the Community Wildfire Protection Plan for the last couple decades. And, our last update was in 2014. We just did a new update. And this is the first year that we did an Ember model analysis as part of the CWPP. And, what it told us is the whole county needed to get placed in the wild and urban interface layer because embers could, land anywhere in the county. It also highlighted that the town of Jackson, which is right below Snow King, which I don't know if you guys ever been to Jackson Hole, but like there's a big mountain right above the town that has, it's predominantly Doug fir. And it's, ready to burn. When it does, it's going to land embers all over town. And this gives us a chance to prepare. And I think like we need to incorporate a ember model analysis in every single CWPP across the country so that, every community can identify really where the true exposure is, understand how they prepare for that exposure, and, truly integrate a product like Frontline.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I was wondering, we were talking about the protecting the structure or dousing the structure, the space around it, so embers don't ignite items and things. Do you also interface or supply or do sprinklers that are in the landscape itself as opposed to being attached or inside of the structure?
Yeah, we do, David. And I mean, there's a number of ways that you could hydrate the areas, on the structure, extending to 30 feet off the walls of the structure, and then going outwards from there. Some of those could be mounted to the home itself, and some of them could be embedded into the landscape. So yeah, we very much can inform either. So a lot of our existing homes, our retrofit applications, will go, on the home. It's copper pipe. Customers, depending on the architecture, will let the pipe patina to match the surround, or they'll paint it to match the surround. And the other opportunity that folks have is embedding it into the landscape. The key is to inform that sprinkler, when to turn on and what to do once it turns on.
Interesting.
That's really cool that you can also do like retrofit, because I feel like, unfortunately a lot of the homes that burn in LA were like older homes, right? That were not built in the, meeting the technology and requirements of new construction today. So being able to maybe add a system that retrofits those houses to make them a bit more fire resilient, I think is really pretty smart.
Yeah, we were just talking about the other day, I think it was on the show, in fact, about the roofs, that aspect of the house. Some of the homes in the Palisades had wood shingle roofs, which is like really cool, but like the worst thing, and a lot of them had vented attics, obviously. And it's just a horrible combination.
Yeah, I mean, material selection's key, right? But like, I think we also need to be cognizant of a couple things, right? The regulating code, in the Western U.S. is primarily the IWUI code, which is overseen by the International Code Council. you had this combination of IWUI code and Chapter 7 in California. The code requirements, in part are passive requirements, and they're important for sure. I mean, like having a non-combustible roof, not having a wood shake roof, makes all the sense in the world. Having ember-resistant vents makes all the sense in the world. There's also requirements in the code, such as water supply, so that firefighters could connect to a water supply when they're at the property. There is, like distant, width of roads so that, firefighters can get an engine down, during a fire. I mean, the reality is there's not going to be a firefighter there, right? To use that water source, or an engine that's going to be on that road. The defensible space, there's likely not going to be a firefighter there to occupy that defensible space either, just statistically speaking, right?
Yeah.
And so to think that we are somehow going to protect against the next fire in the Palisades through just passive mitigations is foolhardy, right? It's not going to happen. And the question is, how many times do we need to learn this lesson? We saw it in the 1960s. There's a great documentary, the Bel Air fire, in the early 60s, where very similar set of circumstances as to what we just saw in January. Hurricane force winds, embers everywhere, limited water supply, and not enough firefighters, because they were to protect structures, because they got people out of harm's way. We're going to continue to see this. This isn't the first fire in the Palisades in Malibu. It's not going to be the last. So preparing for the next fire. I don't know if we can do that under the code cycle approach.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's where the architects come in, right? These are the folks that need to be, ahead of the game, understanding that, a self-defense mechanism is necessary. Active defense, firefighters are critical in determining if a structure is going to survive. You just don't have enough of them. You never have enough of them based on the exposure of embers. So if the code cycles every 5 years with the ICC, you have $1 billion cost weather event once every 3 weeks now. Right? Yeah. Climate is moving so much faster than the code cycle is.
Yeah.
So you've got to be code plus, right? If you're an architect, if you're listening to, this pod, it's important to know this and to prepare that home that's going to be standing for 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, depending on the quality of construction. Knowing that, at some point, at multiple points over the lifespan of that home, it's going to face fire, and there needs to be a self-defense mechanism, because passive on its own isn't going to do it. What I saw in LA is, just because you had, we had a lot of saves in LA, and there were things that came out of the property that weren't at the property before the fire.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We had varying ages of structures that we protected. Some that were from the 60s. Others that were more contemporary. Yeah. Modifying the moisture content of the fuels that are going to receive embers is our goal, right? So when those embers land on those fuels, right, regardless of the age of the structure, they're in a state that's too wet to burn.
I like that, modifying the moisture content. That's such a great. That's gonna be a clip right there. I love that description. I was wondering also about the cost of these exterior systems, and whether or not, in the case of a rebuild house or entire neighborhood in Los Angeles, if insurance companies cover the costs of your system, let's say that wasn't there before, as in the case of most of these houses.
Yeah, so let's talk about the insurance piece for a second. You've got a situation where the insurance market has been obviously destabilized, and it's in large part, based on there's a reliance by the private markets, the insurers, the mortgage holders to rely on public firefighting resources to protect their policies, their assets during a fire. And so, like we talked about a few minutes ago in regards to CWPPs and Ember models being incorporated into the guiding documents, like, it's sort of an untenable situation right now where, insurers can't rely on the performance of public firefighters to protect their private assets. And, as such, they've retreated from the marketplace. As far as, your question, like, would insurers pay for the cost of the system? I'm not sure insurers would pay for the cost of the system, but I think insurers would acknowledge the value of the system and acknowledge that this is a way to defend their policy, their portfolio, because it isn't just a self-defense mechanism for the home, it's a self-defense mechanism for the portfolio as well.
Yeah. Fascinating. I like also your earlier point of thinking community-wide, because assuming, hopefully that most of the houses, when they're reconstructed, do have some of these systems in place, passive and active, it'll strengthen the entire, community as a single unit, which is something that should be thought about. And that's also, frankly, the concern that has been brought up amongst our circle of architects and builders, is hoping to help as many people as possible, and hoping that clients who are rebuilding, they don't go the cheap and fast route, which is understandably tempting, right? For some folks who just need to get back, or they want to get back in and whatever else. But I'm preaching to the choir. It's a long-term thinking is the mindset that anyone in this industries have. And sometimes it's a more difficult headspace for homeowners to get into. The best clients we've had think that way, because they understand that 20, 30, 50-year timeline for themselves or for the structure existing, maybe even after they sell it.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point at the beginning too, by saying we can't control nature, and it's true, and that's kind of like how we have to think about how we build and what we're building, right? Like, are you gonna want to rebuild your house every 20 years, or you just build it once right, so it's resilient to whatever nature has to be doing, you know?
Yeah, Marina, both you guys are spot on. I mean, you have to look at this as a community, as a single unit. And, because the exposure, like we saw in the Palisades, you had like Brooklyn row housing, it went structure to structure, and that exposure is going to happen again through radiant heat and direct flame. So, we really should look at assembling a group of architects that are forward thinking to, integrate Frontline into the whole of the community. I mean, it's a necessity. And, at the end of the day, it's going to be less than the cost of the kitchen. And so, like...
That's a great comparison. That's a great comparison.
If you build a great kitchen, but it's going to burn.
It's less than your appliances.
Kind of.
Yeah. The final question for me. So responding to your last point of architects and communities, hopefully this podcast will help. Obviously, we'll blast it out to all of our networks and share it along. And the final question for me is, if there's anything new that's on the horizon, technology-wise, for your company or anything else, planned or unplanned, or just, thinking to the future for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, look, we demonstrated that we are highly effective in the LA fires. Protecting at scale. Our platform's strong now. It's going to get a lot stronger, and we're going to continue to integrate. We're going to continue to innovate. We're going to be the best at knowing where the fire is, where it's going, and providing that structural level protection. So we could really focus on protecting your home while, you as a homeowner can focus on getting out of harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last question for me is, we typically ask architects what is their favorite building, but since you are in Jackson Hole and we've never been, I'm curious to know, what is your favorite place in Jackson Hole?
My favorite place in Jackson Hole.
You could have a top 3 if it's too hard to pick one.
My favorite place in Jackson Hole. There's a couple spots, right? There's a spot where I ride my bike off the pass that sort of back in a canyon. You're moving through a mixed conifer forest, you're alongside a stream. The amount of water in the stream, varies based on when you're taking that bike ride. You are traveling through, fields of wildflowers. And it's awesome. You get like 3 different stages of flowers, like the early summer flowers, the midsummer, and the late summer, and they all have their own associated smells associated with them. And then you see different pollinators, and like I love that. I love going back to that every year. There's that's going to be probably my terrestrial one. I've got an aquatic one as well, where you've got, I fish a lot. And, there's a few places actually that I'm not going to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah. Leave them off record for sure. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. Harry, thanks so much for making the time on a Wednesday in this case. This was super fascinating. Love what you guys are doing. All the links will be in the podcast show for sure. And this was a pleasure. And let's keep in touch.
Great. Thanks for the time, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail if you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion. Feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.